Ladies and gentlemen, it's becoming very apparent that one of the biggest problems in South Africa is that the politicians in South Africa were trained by the Soviets. And so we see a lot of Soviet-style thinking in the South African political elite, but none of their realizations that the very policies they wish to adopt actually were the death knell of the Soviet Union. And ultimately, one of the things that we tend to see now in a lot of South African politics is a quote often ascribed to Einstein, although I'm not sure if he did actually say it, and that is, the definition of insanity is trying the same things over and over again and expecting a different result. So let's get on to the news of today and see exactly what's going on. Well, the first is a news story by a professor from Botswana, who's a professor in media studies. So yeah, he knows loads about this. And he argues that Black economic empowerment, BEE, is under attack and mustn't be weakened, mustn't be diluted, must be strengthened. He argues that those wanting to weaken BEE are pushing a neoliberal agenda meant to reverse Black gains. He says that the failure of BEE is not in the policy, but in poor implementation and corruption, and still blames apartheid. Yes, Professor of Botswana. Reminds me of the education system in the old days, like before the Enlightenment, where everybody just said the same dogma over and over again. It was like church dogma that was deeply flawed, but nobody wanted to challenge it until Galileo came across and everybody wanted to burn each other. This is what we're seeing in South Africa. The political elite, the academics, are just retarded. BEE has been in place for over 20 years. The implementation of it, if it just keeps failing over and over again, because we're told time and time again, it's just failed because of implementation, then maybe the design of BEE, the concept of BEE is actually flawed. Maybe it's not the implementation, it's the very policy itself, because the policy itself has enriched political connected elites. It's not enriched the masses. This mirrors very much the patronage systems of the past. You could see the same thing in the Soviet-style central planning dogma, and even that failed. Defenders blamed implementation of the Soviet planning rather than the actual ideology itself. Just like apartheid's job reservations that benefited a specific group whilst pushing the economy at large backwards. We see the same things over and over again. We just rebrand them all and just refuse to accept that there's problems here. And this brings us on to the second article. And this is actually the article that Ramaphosa's growth plans are now being called into question. And it's not because the plans themselves, the plans to reignite the economy, are bad. His plans focus on infrastructure, energy reform, youth employment, investment attraction, all the usual stuff. But you see, the problem is that there's no timelines attached to any of this. There's no execution plans, no accountability mechanisms. This is the president's sixth economic growth plan since 2018. Not one of his growth plans have worked. In fact, what we've actually seen is the collapse of SOEs time and time again, with a plan that they'll be reversed and they'll be fixed, but they never are. And you may say, well, maybe it's just, apartheid's fault and maybe, next time it will be better. It never is. The plans are bollocks. Without any form of accountability, without anybody actually pushing these things forward, they're all just fantasy on paper. We've seen this right across post-independent African regimes. Zimbabwe's endless transformation blueprints. Always the plan, never the delivery. It's just the same mistakes over and over again. Talking of the same mistakes over and over again, let's now look at Zuma's MK party. Because according to Zuma, there is forms of internal dissent. Now, this dissent can basically be traced at this specific point in time to Floyd Shivambu, who was removed as Secretary General, was supposed to go to Parliament, now isn't going to Parliament. I don't know. Floyd's having a bad time in the MK party, even though he swears this was the right decision for him. Now, Jacob Zuma has told the members of this party, the MK party, that if they want to get involved in disagreements, they must go start their own party. They must leave. He says they've already been through 7 different secretary generals due to internal disorder. And you see, what everybody's failing to notice is that what we're seeing in the MK party may seem like disunity, but it's not. It's reminiscent of all the ANC internal dysfunctions, or their own internal politics. It's just the ANC, but in a new guise, in a new shirt. The purges, the lack of internal democracy, the cult to personality, the lack of any form of coherent internal policy. It's just Zuma era nostalgia all over again. It's exactly how Zuma ran his politics in the first place. But for some reason, we're told that Zuma's the future and he won't do it next time, even though he's in his mid to late 80s. Again, it's just madness. Madness. Which brings us on to the next article of Zuma and Malema. Because Malema slams, as I said yesterday, I don't know why anybody uses the word slams. It's stupid. But Malema criticizes Zuma as part of the past. He says that the youth, this is the speech he gave on Youth Day, by the way, so that's how he ties it in with the youth. He says the youth must not follow old men in their 80s who pretend to lead the future. And he asserts that the MK party is just recycled rot. Very true. So what exactly does Malema have that's not recycled rot? Well, he talks about his own internal policies, about expropriation and nationalism, and I'm reminded, Julius, my boy, these are ANC policies. The ANC policies that you were fed whilst in the ANC, under Zuma, and you're just saying the same recycled garbage all over again. So whilst you're saying that South Africa and the youth must not follow old men in their 80s, you're following old men in their 80s by recycling their policies. And you can see it. EFF and the MK party feed on the same ANC legacy. Anger, racism, redistribution without productivity. It's all the same rubbish. Where have we seen this? Oh yeah, let's remind ourselves that these parties they love China. Love it. And so we actually saw this in China's Cultural Revolution, where the youth were weaponized against the old people. But all it did is end up in tyranny. It wasn't freedom. But moving then onwards, Julius, at his Youth Day celebration, also criticized the myth of the white genocide in South Africa and says that Trump and Musk are spreading disinformation over the concerns of Afrikaners. And he made the allegation yesterday that what he was actually trying to do was struggle for racial justice. He wasn't actually trying to call for the death of other people, and then proceeded to sing Kill the Boer, so you see how that works. But you see, even if Julius says that the actual literal phenomenon of white genocide isn't true, violent crime against minorities is very real, and it's often ignored. And Malema frames everything based on racial binaries. He just inflames the situation over and over again. He doesn't attempt to heal any form of racial grievances, any form of injustices of the past. Instead, what he does is he reframes crime and violence in terms of racial justice. So you see, these guys aren't being racially picked on. It's like, it's justice, man. Why are you against justice? In this regard, Malema never offers solutions. It's just slogans. It's just scapegoats, more fire branding, more identity politics, never any form of leadership. Julius doesn't have anything here to offer anybody. Nothing. Moving swiftly on then, the next article that came out was this repeated suggestion to those immigrating to get your tax affairs into order. Now, we've seen the South African government ramping up this whole tax affairs as you leave thing more and more, the so-called exit tax, if you want to call it that. And this is the news. The SARS have suggested that if you're immigrating, you must settle all your tax affairs. Otherwise, you could still be caught in taxes in South Africa. Now, you see, there's a reason the ANC is doing this, and that is because the news came out that skilled professionals are leaving the country, and instead of fixing this problem and making them stay, the ANC's approach to this as well, squeeze them for more tax as they exit the door. It's a form of financial gatekeeping, not a form of political reform. or even reform of the country in order to make these professionals stay. It's a way to basically get your last squeeze out of the individuals as they leave. And you may look at this and you say, well, where have we seen this before? Again, yeah, we've seen this in the Eastern Bloc. Because in the Eastern Bloc, when parties left the Eastern blockades, they were punished for leaving the systems. And they were punished in pretty much the same way as this exit tax, right? So again, it's Soviet playbooks over and over and over again. The ANC want your money. Even if they've failed to do anything, they just want your money. They don't care about anything else. It's just about your money. So, moving swiftly on. I mentioned this yesterday. Imbalula is being sued by AfriForum through a private criminal prosecution. And this is actually over a form of doxing of a white principal. Now, this white principal, just for knowledge, actually was cleared. He was cleared of all charges. But Imbalula wrote numerous press articles around him and pushed for him to be sanctioned because of, reasons. Anyway, Imbalula attacked the principal over a dispute. He accused him of inciting harassment. He did all sorts of stuff. He attacked the guy personally. And now when he was acquitted, he's being held accountable for basically pushing forward disinformation, if you want to call it that. Maybe disinformation is not the right word. Maybe the word we actually really want to use is libel or defamation. In any case, the ANC says that actually, you can't criticize him for this because he was speaking the truth for the voiceless. Zero accountability. And so what they're doing is they're glorifying the abuse of public figures as authentic leadership. Oh, I see. And then they're going to go on to have this whole national dialogue where we need to save democracy, whilst they themselves undermine democratic norms and embolden online bullying. And then they're going to go stop you from doing online bullying. That's just beyond a joke. And we've seen this again, time and time again, in forms of post-revolution regimes where the elites are always beyond reproach. Any criticism is just deemed to be betrayal of the struggle. But this is exactly what Imbalula's done. He said things online that are false. He incited violence against an individual that was cleared. He shouldn't have done it. He's being sued for it. And he's like, nope, can't criticize me. I'm beyond reproach. I'm the good guy. Yeah. Cool. I'll tell you who's also the good guys, and this is the news that SAPS officials are saying that their mental health is now costing 130 million plus per year. This is that sick leave in SAPS. The police is skyrocketing, especially amongst frontline officers. Now, a lot of them are saying the reason for this is that they're overworked, underpaid, demoralized. They say corruption, political interference, understaffing. All of these things lead to an ineffective police force, and so many of them are taking mental sick leave, which in itself is mental because they're understaffed and underpaid, and then they're just going to disappear and they're not going to be there. So who's doing law enforcement? And again, guess where we saw this? Late stage Soviet era. Police and military forces were all burnt out, broken, ineffective. They stopped going to work. So crime became a thing. It's almost like we've seen this playbook somewhere before. But we must remind ourselves, the ANC broke law enforcement. They're the ones that broke it. That's a very final news story. Just, again, reminiscent of how dumb the ANC are. The ANC condemns Israel for targeting civilians in Iran. They urge for peace, but take no diplomatic steps or meaningful roles to mediate any form of peace talks. Let us not forget, as I said yesterday, the ANC have no diplomatic channels to Israel because they cut those all off with the Gaza-Israel operation. So why is this the highest form of just stupidity? Because Iran's firing missiles at Tel Aviv, Haifa, all pedestrian areas, all targeting civilians. Every day. They're doing it right now. Does the ANC say, Israel, Iran, don't target civilians? If you're going to apply a principle, you apply it to both. You don't apply it in a partisan way. This is the ANC's classic moral high ground, with just nothing attached to it. It's all just ideological posturing to serve their own personal interests. Dang, where have we seen this all before? Just constantly crying abroad whilst overseeing chaos in South Africa. Back at home. It's exactly what this is. It's the same moralizing. Let's go out there and do moral grandstanding. Your country's in ruins. You're not making any steps to bridge the issues in South Africa itself. You're spending time abroad yapping on like you're somehow the moral authority, while showing that actually you're siding with not the good guys, but somehow you're the good guys? I can't, man. It's too much. It's too much. And so what we can surmise from every single news article that we've seen today, it's all just Soviet dogma, time and time again. The Soviet Union died in the 90s. It collapsed underneath the weight of its own contradictions. It just didn't work. But in typical communist fashion, don't worry, it's never truly been done. We'll do it better this time. Even though we're probably the most inefficient, useless government to ever walk the planet. Anyway, that's just my views. Do let me know what you think in the comment section below. Until tomorrow, bye.
How it started.
March to Gaza. We gather in Egypt, and on the 15th of June, we will walk through Sinai up to the Rafah border crossing.
How it ended. She tried chanting! Not a chance! You don't stand a chance! Did you hear Rebecca in the back trying to start a chant? We are peaceful, why aren't you? Okay, I'm so sorry. They're Egyptians, not your barista at Starbucks. Welcome to the Middle freaking East. This isn't the streets of New York City anymore, where your number one threat is getting peed on by a homeless man. It's the Middle East. And they don't like you. What a reality check this must have been to all these organic underwear wearing people that thought they could just go to the Middle East and just cross all the borders like a little ferry, and all the countries will accept them for who they are, and then just go to Egypt, who's been also blocking and blockading Gaza, which I'm sure they had no idea until they got there. They probably got there like, Egypt, we're here to save you. And Egypt's like, what are you talking about? We do not want you to save us. We are peaceful, how about you? Shut up. Stop talking.